Greetings all, I hope this video finds you well and experiencing a wonderful start to the new year. In this video, the Forge is going to be hitting you with the ranked list of every single Hollow Knight boss, including those found in both the DLCs from embarrassingly easy to absolute hellstorm. So let's go on ahead and get started. Honestly, don't even act surprised. Nasik is by far the most cheesable boss in the entirety of Hollow Knight. Nasik essentially tricks you into thinking he'll be difficult due to his intimidating appearance, plus the spooky build-up the game takes you through just to get to his room, and he then proceeds to demonstrate to you just how much of a pussy he can be. He has one attack. That's it. One. Start from one side of the room and run full tilt sprint at you, then start from the other side and do completely the same thing. When he isn't attacking, he spends the other 90% of the fight hiding out of sight like a little bitch. I've heard people saying you can pretty much just hole up into one corner of the room and continue hitting him with your nail when he gets close to you, but I found myself not even needing to do that. There aren't any environmental hazards you have to worry about, leaving 100% of your attention completely fixated on the boss. If this boss had spiked floors or lesser enemies or something, I can totally imagine it being a pretty frustrating fight. But until something changes my mind, Nasik is going to earn the biggest bitch award from me just because of how hyped I was prior to this fight, only for it to end in disappointment and anticlimax. Well, so far this whole list has probably been pretty predictable. Start off with a controversial first pick like Nasik and then immediately backpedal to the first boss in the whole game. The Girl's Mother is a beginner's boss, sure, but I'm putting her over Nasik considering your plate of abilities this early on in the game is pretty empty. Since this is the first boss, you basically have to enter the fight with no upgrades and no abilities, but that doesn't mean this fight won't take more than 30 seconds. Honestly, if it wasn't for the lower left title displaying her name, I would have mistaken this thing for just a normal heavy hitter enemy. The only thing that's frustrating about this fight is after you've already killed her, and her entire colony of children just erupts out of her stomach in true xenomorph fashion. I think I took more hits from her babies than the actual boss. Anyways, pretty easy fight. Next. The Broken Vessel is a boss you only face once you've plunged pretty deep into the kingdom and are on the verge of discovering Old Hallownest. The Broken Vessel can be a bit of a challenge first off, but his attacks become very quickly predictable. He has the courtesy of giving you a nice long wind-up warning before lunging at you with his nail, and his ranged attacks are not something he uses often, only when you force him down to certain percentages of health. Then he'll do this shit right here. Honestly, this was super frustrating my first time going against him, but I realized that if you just hug the corner of the room, 90% of the time these orange globs don't even hit you. And then you can go back to wailing on him a little more, dodge here, attack there, and mark that fight off the list. The False Knight probably sounds like he should be much lower on the list than where I placed him, but he did kill me once, so I was like, fuck it, I'll move you up a couple spots, whatever. In quite possibly the stupidest way I've ever managed to get killed, by the way. The fight ends with him doing a shiny metal ass bounce maneuver into the floor and destroying the ground. What should have been the end of the fight was something I unfortunately got caught under, and thus was something I ended up dying to. Fueled by an overwhelming embarrassment of how much of a jackass I probably looked like, I attempted to fight a second time and dispatched him no problem. For a game beginner boss, this guy has some pretty nifty moves. You attack his armor, he falls down, and then you attack his head for some extra damage, and then he'll get back up and have a childish bitch fit with his mace and summon boulders down on your head. Now for the most part, his attacks are still pretty easy to dodge around, but the shockwave attack he winds up just a little longer than you think he does, which can result in taking hits that you really shouldn't have. Other than that though, easy peasy cheddar cheesy. The Queen's Gardens is one of the final areas you can access in the game, so by this time you've learned it's wise to carry a bit of caution with you. The Queen's Gardens also throws some of the most agonizingly bullshit platforming challenges at you, second only to what you find in the White Palace. That said, the Traitor Lord boss fight is relatively easy considering he's one of the bosses that pretty much close out the game. He's basically a beefier, meaner version of a regular Mantis traitor, moveset included. Shadow dash through his attacks and follow up with your own, and he gets kind of easy after a while. If you manage to follow Cloth around Hallownest and get her to meet up with you in the gardens, she'll actually help you during the fight. I don't think she does much damage with her club, but if you defeat the Traitor Lord, you get to watch this badass exchange between the two, where she unfortunately gets stabbed, but in her last dying strength manages to bury her giant tree stump looking club right into the Traitor Lord's face, effectively killing both of them. Yet another pick from me that will probably yield comments saying he should be a little higher, but the Crystal Guardian boss to me really was not that threatening. It took maybe 30 seconds to down his first form and access the bench because he just doesn't do shit. A considerable part of the challenge comes from the lasers that shoot from above, and if you just play it cool and stand still, they don't even hit you most of the time. He spends half the fight jumping around like an asshole, and the other half of the fight actually providing a decent offense to try and laser you to death. Really, keeping up with all the lasers being fired on the screen is the only frustrating thing about this fight, and it's not even that big of a deal. His health pool is small enough to be able to end the fight quickly, even in his second form. I'm not splitting this boss off into two contenders, and I'm treating both forms as one boss, so I will say, even though the second form is considerably harder to keep up with than the first, you can still use the same strategies and tactics and down him in no time. It took me a while to actually find this thing hiding out in the crevices of the Forgotten Crossroads. I'd say out of all the crannies in the area, this was probably the single area that was indeed the most forgotten of the Crossroads. I played through the entire game without even realizing this fucker was here, just chilling out behind a wall. Unfortunately, you end up fighting him in a pretty enclosed space. He has claw attacks that prevent you from bum rushing him with close range attacks, and he also spits glowing syphilis at you from afar. So there's really no means of cheesing your way to an easy victory with this one. You just gotta pay attention to what's going on, attack when you have an opening, and he rewards you with a mask shard when he goes down, making the fight actually pretty fulfilling. This boss was always a little creepy to me. A giant, omnipotent, all-seeing life form, it looks like they were caught straight out of jellyfish fields. Humu is two things. One, an incredibly weird word to say, and two, basically just a waiting simulator. This boss is not really an eventful one, which can lead to you taking some hits in some pretty stupid ways just because you're losing attention. Its primary attack is this Lumafly zapping maneuver that follows you through the room for a few seconds. Really, all you have to do is run away from it. Your worst enemy in this fight isn't even the boss itself. It's catching up to it once Quirrell has spliced its head open like a watermelon. And then going for it, you proceed to fall off a ledge and take a watery plunge while the boss laughs at you and resets itself after having taken no damage. This boss, I believe, is hard, but for a really weird reason. It's not fighty hard, it's more of an unnecessary evil, having to dodge around so many things at once, and then being heavily restricted to how much damage you can do when there's an opening. It's not a boss I died to, but it took me much longer than I feel like it should have. There's a lot of things you need to pay attention to in this fight. Honestly, the worst part about fighting this thing is intermittently taking dives into the water. It doesn't hurt you or anything, but it's basically a shining beacon for every enemy on the screen in your immediate vicinity to go straight up your ass all at once. Standing still is the worst possible thing you could do for yourself in this fight. Fluke phase are always spawning all the time. I don't even know what it is about these creatures, but I have enough trouble dodging around one at a time, so for the game to throw 6, 7, 8 at me at the same time, it feels like I'm being attacked on a personal level that I'm really not okay with. I found using the Desolate Dive maneuver whenever they're all near you can send them away pretty quickly, and you have plenty of opportunities to hit things, so running out of your magic juice isn't really a worry you should have. Same thing for most of the others, kill all the distractions first, attack when you have an opening, it'll be over before you know it. The Overseer of the Soul Sanctum has some tricks up his sleeve that I really don't care too much for. It's especially hard to heal in this fight because he's really good at maintaining a constant pressure on you, always hurling magic balls at you, diving into the ground causing shockwaves, and his rotating spinny bullshit attack is something I get hit with nearly every damn time he does it. Not sure why, it's probably user error, but for some reason I had to dedicate a lot of practice to dodging this attack. It gets even worse during his dream form when he spawns 6 of them and they're much faster. They're just never in a comfortable position. Half the time I feel like I could stand still and they just glide around me, but they have such an erratic motion pattern that fighting the urge to move out of the way is next to impossible. He's a fairly challenging mid-game boss with a pretty long list of attacks to keep track of, so even though this boss demands a lot of your concentration, he isn't someone I think you should die to more than a couple times. The closing fight of the third and final stage of the Colosseum of Fools. The God Tamer battle can be either a complete bitch or extremely easy depending on how you approach the fight. There are 2 enemies attacking you at once, so on the surface it definitely looks like there's a lot to keep your attention on. It's easy to overwhelm yourself into dodging around them, but this is one of those fights where you really have to pay attention to the charms you're rolling with. If you have a spell build, you can catch them straight out of the gate and just throw a few Shade Souls their way as soon as the fight begins. What's so troubling about this fight is the idea of getting to that point with full health and full soul is honestly just stupid. It's fucking stupid. The entire gladiator beatdown you just fought your way through has probably left you completely exhausted and mentally fatigued. The last thing on your priority list right now is having to trudge through a boss fight, but the game decides to toss one your way anyways. And if you die, it's the whole third stage over again. If the stakes weren't as high as they are, this boss would be much lower down the list, but the paranoia of screwing something up and dying, having to replay the whole stage all over again, really plays an integral part in this fight, just because of how petrifying that fear is of having to start the whole thing over again. And in case you forgot we were covering DLCs, this should remind you. I didn't just forget about it mid-script and suddenly decided to switch gears to the DLCs. That's really just how hard these bosses are. Because if you've played the DLCs, chances are you're already familiar enough with how the game works to be able to take a punishment or two. Meaning the DLC bosses are noticeably more difficult and more frustrating than any vanilla boss in Hollow Knight. Grey Prince Zoet, as much of an annoying little cocksucker that he is still the easiest of the DLC bosses in my honest opinion. It's so insulting losing to the fight because the animators really make it look like the boss doesn't have a single damn clue what he's doing half the time. He literally falls on his ass and creates a shockwave. Like, that's an attack. That's an actual attack that is programmed in the game. He can also summon small enemies that are just distracting enough to lure you into getting hit by something stupid, and it's just really easy to get hit during this fight because there's so much going on. So if you don't consider dodging to be your forte, you might have a rough time with this one. And immediately after, you go toe-to-toe with the White Defender, which is basically the Dung Defender only in his non-senile glory days. But for some reason, I found this fight to be actually easier than the Dung Defender fight towards the beginning of the game. I guess it was just because I already had somewhat of a good idea what his attack patterns would be. Not to say he doesn't give the old defender a run for his money, he's naturally a younger and much stronger knight. His tactics are much faster and harder to keep up with, but the fact that this is a dream fight means that you could have gotten away with fragile charms without losing them upon death, because you don't really die, you just wake up next to him and start the fight over again. This kinda trivializes the fight a lot. It's not a frustrating fight, but it is extremely difficult. If you end up dying, you most likely know why you died and what mistake you made. No bullshit, just straight up hand-to-hand combat. This is also why the White Defender is one of my favorite bosses in the game. And then there's Grim, the master of his edgy Halloween troupe I decided to place here because I believe this is where it's time to start bringing in the trump card bosses. Beginning the second half of this giant list is Grim because his attacks are just insane. They're wicked and they're mean. He has a projectile attack that's basically a souped-up fuck you version of the Broken Vessel's orange glob attack. He sends heat-seeking bats at you and he throws fire at you. And he throws a shit ton of it too. His body turns into a giant screw, his cloak can summon spikes from the ground. He's got everything that pisses me off. You'll probably die a couple times to this idiot just due to being so disoriented half the time. It's definitely one of those bosses you have to continue throwing yourself at until he finally breaks and you come out with the victory. Grim is also another one of my all-time faves for that very reason. Jesus Christ. The title Dung Defender is certainly spot on because this entire fight is a straight up piece of shit. It's a mental endurance run going up against this guy because he has such a large health pool. A lot of his attacks involve dynamic movement, meaning it's super hard to zero in on him and deal damage. He's either burrowing through the ground or tossing himself into the air after throwing his heat-seeking shit missiles at you. This guy is a handful, and really it just comes down to patience. He doesn't leave himself open to attack very often, but when he does, it's usually for a good chunk of time. So you should have no problem getting in a good few hits during times where he's relatively still or catching his breath. I'll go ahead and tell you the most annoying part about this fight is having to guess when it's over. I don't think this is the hardest boss fight in the entire game, but for sure it has to be one of the longest. Like I said, patience goes an incredibly long way here. The Hornet puts me in the mind of one of those perpetual encounters that stay consistent throughout the game, and they're almost never that hard until the final time you have to face them. This is kinda one of those. You fight Hornet twice, once in the Green Path and a second time in Kingdom's Edge. Hornet is a boss that initially gives you exceedingly low expectations because of how trivial she is during her first encounter, and then she takes your low expectations of her and uses those expectations in the second fight to relentlessly, repetitively kick your stupid ass. When I'm talking about Hornet, I'm more than anything talking about the second encounter here. She's twice as fast, twice as unpredictable, and her list of attacks has doubled in size. It's Hornet, just quicker and much more powerful. Really nothing to this one. It's a bitch. It's such a huge bitch, but it's a bitch you can conquer, and you feel damn good about cleansing your hands of the fight and claiming your victory afterwards, so it's a pretty nice trade-off. You know, I really only have myself to blame for how hard this fight was. There were actual signs this game was giving players as a means of caution to divert them from going through with this fight. These guys are literally the Abyss Watchers of Hollow Knight, and the game makes sure to go out of its way to let you know that. Even before you make your way into the village, Quirrell pretty much tells you, my dude, your shit better be upgraded because these guys are gonna go forearm deep into your asshole, and there's not dick you can do about it. This fight demands 110% of your concentration. They're fast, they're unpredictable, and they do a really good job of leaving little room for being attacked. 80% of the time they're even on the screen, they're almost always attacking. And once you defeat the first one, two of its side hoes spring into action and start attacking you at the same fucking time. There's really no strategy to this other than just buckle up and be ready for whatever this fight gives you. Attack when they throw their nails out, downstrike them when they charge at you, and just pray you kill them before they kill you. Fittingly enough, one of the game's closing bosses is also one of the hardest. Obviously, no one expected this fight to be a cakewalk, but that certainly doesn't mean fighting this behemoth doesn't feel like a giant needle up my fucking ass. As anticipated, this guy also has the longest list of attacks you have to keep track of. He can teleport, swing his nail, shoot orange crap at you, teleport while shooting orange crap at you, turn the floor into lava, and basically just ooze death wherever he goes. The only luck I had during this fight was to jump up and downstrike him when he was in the middle of a combo, and I was able to get in a few good hits that way. The Hollow Knight is the big bad of the game, and Hollow Knight makes sure you know that. You actually have to initiate the fight by breaking his chains, tethering him to the ground, at which point he will thank you by ruthlessly pounding your ass apart. This is one of the few boss fights in which I actually had luck using spell builds and charms like the Soul Eater and Shaman Stone. He spends a lot of the fight teleporting away from you to perform a ranged attack, and when he does that, just hit him with some Shade Soul and you should be able to down him in a few minutes. Yeah, a few minutes, because that's literally how long it takes. I don't know why this boss was as hard as he was for me. I hear people saying the Collector was one of the select few bosses that players actually first tried defeated on their way through, and I guess I really just didn't have that same experience. It's because of these roly-poly fuckfaces that consistently make sure they're always exactly where you don't want them to be. These things are my least favorite enemy in the whole game because they're so small, and half the time it doesn't even register that they're close to you until they've already rolled away part of your health. The way you have to time your nail strikes to keep them from hitting you is super awkward to me, and I just never really mastered these guys. So to see a boss in the game that spawns these dickheads on the reg was not a fun realization. He's one of those hide in a corner and let the little dudes do all the work kind of bosses, and I just hate those assholes, I really do. I died a couple times more than I should have during this fight, but eventually I ended up emerging from it and consequently not even feeling as accomplished as I thought I would. So yeah, 2 out of 10 for me. I don't know what else to say about this fight, other than it's more annoying than it should be, but it's also the true ending final boss, so it's probably good that it's this hard? I don't know. Anyways, the game really does a spectacular job of organizing bosses from easiest to hardest by saving the hardest for last. In fact, with the exception of a few, you'll notice a decent part of this list has the bosses listed roughly in the order that you face them anyway. The largest frustration about the Radiance isn't that her attacks are hard to dodge or anything, which they are, nor the huge health pool that she has, which she does, but it's the fact that every single attack takes double the amount of normal damage. Every single thing you can get hit with is a 2 hit point attack, except falling off the map, that still does 1. The first phase of this fight is frustrating enough, but then the game does its best Mega Man impression by taking away the ground and replacing it with these stupid bastard platforms that give you just barely enough room to dodge what's coming to you. You have to be extremely precise with your evades and your attacks, because she does move, and it's the most annoying shit in the world racing up to her and then having her teleport to the other end of the screen before you can land any hits. Just Godspeed, friend, is all I've got to say. The Watcher Knights were my irrefutable #1 kryptonite in possibly the entire game. There is an explanation for the next and final boss on this list, but this one I really just have no excuse for. I suck major ass at tracking obstacle paths and predicting where things are going to go. It's why I had such trouble with the Dung Defender, and it's why I had such trouble with the Collector. because both of these bosses had signature attacks that prompted you to anticipate the path of these hazards. Well, this particular fight is basically all that is. If they aren't swinging their nail, they're rolling. If they aren't rolling, they're bouncing. And if they aren't bouncing, they're swinging. These guys give you no margin of error. Imagine if the Dung Defender threw his first 2 shit bombs at you and then they just never disappeared and stayed on screen for the entire fight. Well, that's the Watcher Knights in a nutshell. Not even quick focus can save you half the time, because when one knight isn't attacking, the other one is almost always gearing up for a roll towards you. You never face less than 2 at once, and the entire fight is just a shitstorm. Once again, no solid advice here, just get good and pay attention to what's happening. This guy. This fucking guy. Jesus of Nazareth, this guy has problems. This is one of those bosses where there's officially no shame in looking up the FAQs. Once again, a reiteration of the Grim fight, but the Nightmare King is significantly more different than any Dream fight in the rest of the game. Every attack you thought you knew how to dodge around has some version or tweak that makes it even more of a bitch and harder to anticipate. And may I remind you, even regular Grim was still fast enough to kill me a few times before I downed him. He now has gaping pillars of flame, even more fire bats, a longer flame spawner, and all of that in addition to the attacks he already had. Oh, and also just like the Radiance, every single attack deals double damage. I really have trouble putting into coherent words how much of a fuckhead this guy is. You really can't attack him any other instance than when he's launching fire bats at you out of fear that you'll take damage from anything else. And the only hope of dodging anything in this fight is relying on your Shade Cloak to just dash right through whatever he throws at you. And sometimes even that's not enough. This fight has a nasty tactic of disorienting you, making you think the entire fight is going to be piss-ass fast, and then the ground spikes come up and, oh, now I have to stand still for 2 seconds and do nothing. It's just barely enough time to heal, and if you don't have the Deep Focus charm, you're far past fucked anyways because of his double damage output. You do not want this fight to last long. Like, seriously, get in as much damage as you can possibly wedge into every window. Ideally, you can race up to him while he's fire batting, jump over the first one and shadow dash through the third, and you'll be right there next to him. But that's easier said than done, and if you don't time the jumps correctly, you'll get clipped by one of the bats moving above you, and that's goodbye to another 2 of your hit points. The flame spawner requires you to stop whatever the hell you're doing and immediately start humping one side of the screen, because that's just how fast this attack goes up. And there's basically no analyzable pattern in which the flame balls conform to, so if you think you're safe just because you're far away from it, well, this thing can still wreck your HP and your flawless run if you screw up so much as 2 or 3 times. You cannot afford to piss around in this fight. Everything is do or die, and most of the time it's the latter. Equip your best charms, kill him fast, or he'll kill you even faster. If he's on the screen, he's attacking you, just plain and simple. I've beaten this fight only once my entire time playing, and I still think that was due to just some planet formation lining up in a way that channeled enough celestial energy into my brain to focus just long enough on the fight to break my foot off in his batty ass. All 22 bosses, all ranked. Some are easy, most are hard, but some are just batshit nuts. I didn't include the Dream Warriors in this list because I never really had trouble defeating them. They had really predictable attacks overall, and it just came down to the amount of concentration you paid to each fight. There aren't any tactics you learn from the Dream Warriors that you don't learn through any of the boss fights. But if this video does get a good response, I might follow up with that. Thanks for tuning into The Forge, and again, thank you for keeping up with our content. This channel is massively grateful for all the support it's received lately, and it really does make my life much happier. In the meantime, check out our Hollow Knight lore if you'd like, ring the bell if you want to never miss another video again, and I guess that just about does it. I'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for sticking around.